Hello, beautiful nerds. My name is Monty Paulson. I lead the Passive House team at RDH Building Science, and it is my privilege to welcome all of you to the Global Passive House Happy Hour, hosted by Passive House Accelerator. This is an intentionally inclusive gathering. We welcome people from all Passive House communities. Why do we do this? Because we're in a damn climate emergency, and in this context, we believe it is irresponsible to let our differences define us. So we welcome people from all backgrounds, from all nations, working in all types of passive house, as well as those working on electrification, embodied carbon, climate adaptation, indoor air quality, and oh yeah, that little task of retrofitting billions of buildings in our lifetime. So please turn on your cameras. We want to see you. Please turn on your microphones. We want to make some noise together in a moment because tonight we are toasting the government of Canada, which, as part of our economic recovery strategy, is offering up to 1 million free EnerGuide assessments. This is like a HERS rating for those of you in the States, as part of strategies to encourage deep energy retrofits. So please raise a glass and join together in a toast to 1 million blower door tests, eh?
Hey.
And special thanks to Lloyd, Altar of Tree Hugger, for putting a point on that. Now, please mute your mics, close that other app you've got open, open your brains. We have a great evening tonight, including the Brain Trust from PHIUS, who've taken the incredibly bold experiment of introducing a prescriptive standard, an easier way to make a single-family passive house, and they're going to talk about that here tonight. Now, please allow me to introduce my co-host, Prudence Ferreira.
Thanks, Monty. Hello, everyone. It's great to see you all. Visionary learners, doers, and creators. I'm Prudence Ferreira, and I lead the Passive House practice for Morrison Hershfield. I've been a Passive House consultant for over a decade, and I remember a time when many of the old timers on this call were part of this tiny group of geeks envisioning a future where Passive House was a mainstream concept. And I'm glad we're here together, and it fills me with joy to see how far that little community has come and all of the bright faces that have joined us along the way. And that joy is all the more poignant because there was a period of time in that past decade that I've been practicing where many of us couldn't see a future where it was possible for us to all be here together, sharing best practices, and a community where practitioners who use PHI, PHIUS, CAGBC, net zero carbon, ILFI, step code can come together and actively share lessons learned, inspiration, and talk about how together we can continue our shared missions of transforming the way buildings are designed and built. I've said it many times before, and this is mirroring and echoing what Monty said, but I feel it does bear repeating, that there really is strength in our diversity of experience and opinion. None of us working in a silo have all the answers, and although we may not always agree on the finer points of every technical approach, science has no ego, data has no ego, and this is all an evolving experiment. Exploring ideas and approaches with a spirit of openness and curiosity will just catalyze our evolution into the future we envision. And I'm super excited for this evening's show as well. With that, I'm going to pass it back to Monty.
Thanks, Prudence. So before we get to the main event, we have a little presentation from Jennie Eber. With more than 10 years of experience in nonprofit, Jennie runs the Alliance Constituent Coordinator for Passive House Alliance. Now, this is the kind of outreach organization of PHIUS, and she's going to share briefly about some of the new programming from PHIUS, this outreach organization.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for having me. I won't take up too much time, but I'm the Constituent Coordinator for PHIUS, and I work with PHIUS now as we're moving into branding the PHIUS Alliance, which is the membership side, as Monty said. And I've been working a lot to offer more programming. So we have been having a monthly webinar, which is free to members and a small fee for non-members. Last month we did embodied carbon, and that was a great response, and that's still available. If you guys want to send me an email, we can get you set up. And then we have an upcoming webinar in December on a passive design ambulatory surgery center in Uganda. So it was not designed in Uganda, but the passive design was set in the US, and then everything was kind of coordinated offsite. And so that should be really exciting. That's December 15th. And then in January, we have a webinar entitled new heat pump technologies to the rescue. So we'll be going through new technologies that are developing for the few speakers. So keep an eye out. The Passive House Accelerator is helping us spread the word, but we have lots of other events too for members that we don't talk about a lot that's also going on. So we're happy to be here and we're happy to share this new prescriptive path with you, but we're also doing a little bit to check out our events as well. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Jenny. So we're going to dive into small breakout rooms for 5 minutes. 5 minutes goes really fast, so make sure you do some rapid fire introductions of yourselves and get around your circle. And here we go. I will see everybody back in 5 minutes. I'm going to do some really fast announcements here, and then we're going to get into the meat of the program. That's why everyone's here. But I wanted to let you know, many of you may know, but at the Passive House Accelerator website, we every Monday publish a Passive House Weekend Preview that has news about upcoming events and educational resources. And so this one, this week's talks a little bit about the podcast, the Passive House podcast, episode number 15. We have over 7,500 downloads already of the podcast, which is pretty fun. This one features an interview between Matthew Cutler Welsh, the co-host of the podcast, and Andy Marlowe of Passive House Design and Construct. Yeah, we have a typo there. There's no E. Passive House Design and Construct in Australia. So check that out. And I'll share a link to this so that everybody can access this information. Passive House Canada is having its big summit next week, and that's December 8th through 10th. So don't miss that. You can access this from anywhere in the world. The Accelerator will actually be involved in a couple of ways. One will be moderating a panel about wildfire smoke and passive house and indoor air quality. And we'll also be aligning our content next week, both at our Tuesday construction tech event and our Wednesday happy hour to connect with what's going on at that summit. So check that out. We've got some great socials coming up, including BS Fridays with Mark Willey, and that's going to feature Doug Farr, a fantastic architect from Chicago, really great person. So check that out, and then all this educational programming here. So again, I'll share the link in show notes, or not show notes, sorry, I'm in podcast land, in chat. And with that, I'll hand it off to Prudence.
Okay, so tonight I have the honor and the challenge of introducing 3 people. We're going to hear from Graham Wright, who's senior scientist and chair of the PHIUS Technical Committee. And then supporting him are Lisa White and James Ortega. I'm not going to be able to tell you guys all of the fantastic stuff that each of these people is involved in but I'll be able to at least give brief introductions so that we can get on with the meat of the presentation. So Graham became licensed as an instructor for PHIUS for the CPHC training in 2011. And then he started working for PHIUS in 2012 as a building scientist. And he currently leads the standards, certification, and energy modeling protocol development at PHIUS. So he sets the research agenda for the technical committee, leads that committee, and he co-authored the PHIUS Plus 2015 standards, PHIUS Plus 2018, now 2021. So he does a lot of the heavy lifting, and he is one of the most interesting people to just sit and chat with for a while and climb inside his brain. And he also loves organic gardening, and yeah, just an all-around wonderful person. And Lisa, who's associate director, Lisa White, associate director of PHIUS, she has been with PHIUS since 2012. And prior to this role, she led the certification review team. So she's had a lot of projects come across her desk. And she's also an instructor for the Passive House Consultant training that PHIUS does and the WUFI Passive Software training. And Lisa wears a gazillion hats all of the time. I don't know exactly how she's able to keep so many things active and organized in her mind at once, but she almost always has an answer for you. Like somewhere from the parts of her brain, she can come up with it, and she's just got it right there. And then James James is also amazing. He's actually the certification manager right now. He leads the team of certifiers at PHIUS. He's been with them since 2015 as a member of the certification team. And as many on this call will attest, he catches everything, all of it. But as a certification reviewer, he's very helpful and very kind and really thorough. And he's always available to help if you get stuck on a project that's registered and full of information. He pretty much has the whole gamut of pre-certified, certified projects like in his head, and can often help consultants come up with solutions based on, having experienced all the projects that come across his desk. He also provides consulting services. I don't know how many of you know, but PHIUS also does feasibility studies and just consulting with people who are interested in certification but aren't sure about it. So that's the great team that we have with us tonight. Graham is going to be driving the presentation, and Lisa and James are supporting and available for the Q&A after. The intention of this really is to do a little bit of a deeper dive that we can do in 15 minutes for what PHIUS 2021 holds for the prescriptive path, which is all new, and to really elicit feedback from you guys. So the questions that you think of, the ideas, the feedback that you have, the open comment period for PHIUS 2021 is open until December 7th. So we're hoping that this helps engage the community and actively contributing to the evolution of the standard. So with that, I will let Graham take it away.
PHIUS Plus 2021 Passive Building Standard. Next slide, please. All right, so what PHIUS Plus does as a passive building standard, it requires design for low heating and cooling loads, peak and annual. That's kind of the distinguishing feature of passive standards. But it also addresses overall energy use and requires quality construction. So switching the order a little bit, we did come up, our major updates for 2021, we did come up with a non-residential quality assurance protocol. And we also made a number of moves on the overall energy front to encourage net zero design and electrification. And then we came up with this prescriptive path for single family residential. So I'll just get the first of those, touch on the first two of those first here. And so the new quality assurance protocol works for all non-residential buildings and for mixed use buildings. There's a great big workbook for that. Next slide. Okay, so on the overall source energy front, basically the idea is to accelerate the glide path to net zero. And so we're also, so for our source zero tier of certification, we're also going to get rid of any fossil fuel combustion appliance on site. This, as many of you may know, we sort of took the same view that Architecture 2030 did, that things should be net zero, and that there's only so much you can do with either conservation or on-site renewables to net yourself out to zero. So you can have off-site renewables, and there's kind of a different there's some different discounting factors for those if you have to use them. And so if you're not going for zero, which we would prefer everyone to go for zero, but we have this other certification tier in terms of the overall energy, where there's a finite target that you have to meet, and that is designed to be challenging but doable just with conservation measures, basically. And so in order to make that happen better, we added some nuance to it this time around for the residential. But even on this what we formerly called core tier, even on this regular tier, we're going to require electrification readiness. Okay, so we had set this idea of, you know, an equal share per person for the overall source energy allowance. But we encountered a use case that could not do that. And that was basically buildings with a whole lot of studio apartments. And so it's somewhat of a consequence of the modeling protocol that, you know, there's a certain fixed amount of plug loads that is assumed to happen per unit. And if you don't have very many people per unit, then that creates a lot of usage per person, or implies a lot of usage per person, which busted these studio apartment designs. So we looked through our study data from 2018 and came up with a correlation that basically gives that a break. So we backed off a little bit from the strict per person allowance, and so that's now kind of dependent on unit density. And you can see some examples here of the same design of a multifamily low-rise with different densities, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, and studios. And so for the more unit dense buildings, then the per person target is relieved a bit and is much more doable. Okay, so the same rule though applies to single family, and so you know, that does again somewhat back away from the strict per person allowance. So you know, if you do have less bedrooms, you get more of an allowance per person now, but you know, you can't. That's not unlimited. There's a range limit on that. So you can't just like keep increasing the floor area and get more source energy allowance. And so in this case, for this house, yeah, they had pushed it a little bit too far. I think the limit is in fact like 1,000 square feet per person of range limit adjustment on that. So these people would have to do something a little bit more still to in their 1 bedroom case to meet the limit. And just like in 2015, it's mostly, the idea is mostly to meet this with conservation, but there's a little bit of renewables that you can count, like solar hot water still works. Okay, so moving into the prescriptive path now. So this is sort of the overall flow chart or of our tiers or certification options. So we've got our performance path, which is based on modeling, PHIUS plus 2021 to that finite target, and then to 0 if you're going to 0. But if you're just doing a single family and you want to skip the modeling, the prescriptive path is available. And yeah, if there's anything about that you don't want to do, you know, you can fall back to the performance path. Okay, so we were asked for a chart of a grid of how this all works. So maybe I'll try and go quickly column by column here. So PHIUS plus 2021, that's the performance path with the finite source energy target. So again, we're modeling to meet our heating and cooling loads. We're modeling to meet our source energy target. And that source energy target now varies with unit density and occupant density, and only a little bit of renewables counts. Electrification wise, we're just requiring readiness on that basic tier. For moving to the right there, for our source 0, same heating and cooling targets. Same modeling so slightly different modeling protocol for source energy where everything's netted out on-site and off-site. And then electrification wise, you just can't do any fossil fuel combustion. For the prescriptive path, since we're avoiding modeling, we have to spell out what are you going to do for all of your passive measures? What are you, and we're not modeling for overall energy either. So we have to spell out all the equipment efficiency measures you have to do. And again, there's no fossil fuel combustion there either. Okay, so there's several aspects to the prescriptive path. There's some additional limitations on the scope in addition to just being single family. And then all the stuff that's sort of in green there is kind of, you can think of that as passive measures and supplementary requirements related to the passive measures. And then, like I say, we have to come up with rules or requirements for all of the mechanical and all the appliances and equipment as well. And so maybe the thing that's going to be least familiar is the requirements for compactness. We started out with just, air tightness, R values, HRV, that kind of thing. But when we tested it on some past projects, there were some like H-shaped buildings that annoyed us with their, with their performance. It wasn't really as good as what we wanted. So we came up with some constraints on the design, architectural constraints to kind of enforce some compactness on the design. And so that consists of compactness in plan and compactness in section. So for compactness in plan, the idea is that we don't want strung out H-shaped or L-shaped or T-shaped buildings. So what creates those is so-called reentrant corners. And so we limit the sort of included area of those. So the cases on the left would sort of just meet the requirement, and the cases on the right are too strung out in plan. For compactness in section, the idea is that you should kind of have a consistent floor area from level to level, so that you're not doing, you're not popping up like towers, or leaving a whole lot of open to below that's cutting into your floor area. Right. So the idea is, so kind of the threshold that we set is around the idea of, if you had a 3-story, you could maybe make the 3rd story about half as big as the other 2, and it would just pass. But if you're trying to do something on the right layer, like a big popped up tower, that's too strung out. And similar there, yeah. There's one more compactness rule which prevents you from doing Z-shaped buildings in section, but yeah, we don't have a graphic quite for that yet. All right, so in addition to being single family, it can be attached or detached, but there are some additional restrictions on the scope. We don't want huge mansions, so we limited the ratio of floor area to bedrooms. Again, no fossil fuel combustion. We don't want to take too much moisture risk, so you can't have an indoor pool. And then, yeah, no natural draft fireplaces. That comes from indoor EPA, Indoor Air Plus. So so all of our prerequisites, our quality assurance, co-requisite programs still apply. The Energy Star certified homes, the Zero Energy Ready requirements, and the Indoor Air Plus requirements. And I've got the page counts there. So, all those checklists add up to some 40 pages of requirements, and our prescriptive checklist that we added adds about 6. And so for the passive measures, air tightness is super number one there. And we're cranking down on that. On the performance path, we would let you get away with 0.06 CFM per square foot. But you know, when we did all our cost optimization studies, the cost optimizer actually usually found it worth it to go tighter. So we tightened up on that. And in the regular program, sort of the preliminary blower tower test is optional, but we're requiring it for the prescriptive path. So you have to get your rater on board earlier. Solar protection, there's three things that are done for that. We limit the overall window to wall ratio and the concentration of glazing on any one facade. Fixed overhangs are required on south-facing windows in hot climates, and the solar heat gain coefficient of the windows is also limited in hot climates. We also have you know, requirements to limit moisture risk at both windows and connections and main assemblies, and to avoid thermal bridges. All right, so there are requirements that are project specific, so that a lot of them are climate dependent, and some of them are building dependent. So for example, the lighting allowance depends on the square footage of the building. The hot water energy allowance is you know, that depends on sort of the occupancy, the number of bedrooms. But there's a whole bunch of stuff which is climate dependent, and some of those things are location specific, and some of them are kind of are figured out zone by zone. Okay, so to give you, we were asked for like give a couple of for instances. So here's what. So we picked out 3 locations. So Austin, Texas, Vancouver, BC, and Duluth, Minnesota. And so you can see the main R values in the top there. And the window U value, that should be a maximum, I think, for U value. So the window, let's see, what do I want to say about this? Okay, so yeah, I'll go with the window. So the window U value requirement is based on a comfort principle. So we want to have windows that are good enough that they don't require heat under the window, or to avoid like draft at the ankle, basically. The window solar heat gain coefficient, I believe we just carried through on the zero energy ready requirements there. There's also a condensation resistance requirement on the windows and doors, and that involves 2 things. That depends on how humid the climate is, and also how cold it gets at the 99% design temperature. So you can see in Vancouver, BC, it's neither that humid nor that cold. So the condensation resistance requirement is low. But in Austin, it's pretty stiff because it's humid, and in Duluth, it's also pretty stiff because it's so cold. And then, yeah, in most climates, we don't require the fixed overhangs for shading, but in Austin, Texas, we would. So for the mechanicals, that's also slightly climate dependent. We've picked out an example here of if you're using an air source heat pump. There's different, there's sort of, the requirements on the equipment efficiency are kind of relative to the category of thing that they are. So there's different thresholds for like ground source heat pump if you're going to use that. But basically what's going on here is that it's asking for Energy Star most efficient 2020, except in the colder climates where we require the Northeast Energy Partners criteria, which sets a minimum on the CO or minimum COP at 5 degrees outside. For the HRV, there are requirements on the winter, on the sensible recovery in the winter, and the total recovery in the summer. And the sensible recovery in the winter is again based on a comfort principle. That's trying to maintain a 60-degree delivered air temperature at, I believe, the coldest monthly average temperature. And then for coming up with the total recovery efficiency, that was based on a survey of how much dehumidification is needed, basically. So in climate zones where there's a lot of dehumidification needed, we require latent recovery. And then there's also a limit on the length of the ducts that connect to the outside, and that is based on like the building size, basically the number of stories and the square footage. So if you're wondering how we came up with those R values, you might remember that when we set our heating and cooling performance targets in 2018, we did a bunch of cost optimization on a bunch of study buildings to do that, and then fitted regression formulas to the performance of those optimized buildings to come up with the climate specific target formulas. And basically what we've done is the same type of analysis, but for the R values instead of the overall performance. And so we did find good correlations for those. This is illustrating kind of the sensitivities of how that works for the wall R value. And so what that indicates is as the climate gets, as the heating degree days go up or the design temperature goes down, you have to beef up the wall R value. And also as your marginal electricity price increases, it pays back better, right, to increase the insulation. So we're going to bump it up for that too. And that was a pretty good correlation. Statistics wise, it had a correlation coefficient of 0.88. But, there is some scatter, it doesn't fit perfectly. And so, we took like the root mean square error of the fit, which happened to be 5.6, and just added that as a constant to the requirement to make it a more conservative. So we call that a conservative fit instead of a best fit is the idea there. Okay, so we have a workbook. So one thing I didn't mention yet is that we do allow some little performance trade-offs within the prescriptive path. You can do an overall UA. So if you don't want to meet the R values and of the assemblies individually, you can meet an equivalent overall UA. And there's also a trade-off for the equipment efficiency. And that includes all of the builder installed lighting, hot water, and appliances, but not the heating and cooling stuff or the ventilator. So there's basically a workbook that's going to help out with these calculations, including, and you can see there's sort of hidden sections there on compactness that aren't filled out. We're going to add capability or calculation support for those things too. But yeah, there's already support in there for like, you know, complying with your window condensation requirement. Okay. And so, yeah, please give us feedback on this. There are several pieces to it posted on the website. There's the full checklist and the calculator, which calculates the things that vary with climate or with building parameters. And then there's this assistant thing, which helps you with this the side calculations. And I think with that, we did have, I think we were asked for some leading questions. So maybe we could, I think that's the next one, right? Yeah. So here are some questions that we had. So do we still need CPHCs submitting these projects, or can the rater do it, kind of thing? So right now we have a number 2. We had that 0, you know, that 0 tier for the performance path, but we don't have a 0 tier for the prescriptive path. Is that a good idea or not? And you know, since we're not doing WFI passive modeling, that would have to be based pretty much on like the HERS score. Yeah, we're wondering if that's a good idea.
Maybe we just leave these up, Graham, and they can answer in the chat on stuff they want to, basically. Just say like at number 1 or something, or at number 4 if you have a specific comment. It might be a good idea.
I guess I don't need to read it. Yeah.
You read them. There's and you won't be surprised that there's a whole host of questions in the chat, and I'm really glad I don't have Sean's job tonight to try to moderate all those. I will throw out this one observation though, is, you know, having done an awful lot of single family homes in Vancouver, BC, this climate is really familiar to me. These projects are, you know, the wall R values are in the same range as a single family with really good form factor would need to achieve the PHI standard. You know, they're in the same ballpark. We'd probably have to put in a little better HRV and a little shorter duct links, but that's not a huge deal. And so it makes the calculator hugely useful, because if we had a project that was just sniffing at passive house and trying to decide what it costs, I could literally tell them, look, go look at what it costs you to build the R values it says in that calculator. And our project, after we've modeled it, whether it's in WFI passive or PHPP, is going to wind up pretty darn close to that cost estimate. And that is a huge leap forward. And so thank you for that. Sean, are you ready to go?
You know what? I've actually learned how to get better. And so you can just see, I actually posted everybody who asked a question, you know who you're in the queue. And if you asked a couple more questions, I even figured that out too. I didn't think it happened. So if you're in the queue, mind the gap. And Lisa, thank you so much for answering most of these questions. So if you feel like your question has been answered, let me know. I'll take you out of the queue. But Prudence, you had 4 questions. I will let you choose which one you want to ask. And Isaac, quit playing on the screen. Thank you.
What? You're only going to give me one, dude?
Well, hey, there's a queue, and we got 15, well, actually 17 minutes,
I know.
13 minutes before we go to the after hour.
Let the others answer class.
Okay, that's fine. All right, I'll just ask one then, and maybe if we have time, we can get to the other one. What does limited renewable energy mean? Limited to what? Limited to roof area? Limited to the site?
It's basically the same idea as 2015. It's whatever is captured and utilized right on site. You don't get credit for exports, basically. So yeah, all of the solar hot water counts, and whatever the coincident use fraction is of your PE of your PV generation counts. So with a small array, you know, you get to count all of it, but for your like huge array, you know, you're exporting most of it, so that doesn't count.
Thank you.
Prudence, the audience has asked, they've demanded, give you 2. Go ahead.
Okay, I asked that one mainly for the benefit of others, actually. I'm on the PHIUS technical committee, so the cat's out of the bag. The other question that I had is in terms of the logic for discounting the renewable energy factors. You put a slide up that showed whether it's power purchase agreements or on-site renewables or renewable energy credits. Can you just talk about that briefly? The logic there.
The scheme there was basically to align with ASHRAE 189.1, the new Appendix J, which slightly privileges on-site compared to what we were doing before. Mostly that, although we kept our treatment of the renewable energy credits the same as what we had it before. They had changed a little bit, but we stuck with what we had.
And for those who aren't familiar with what that is, it's 5 to 1, right? So for every 5 RECs you buy, that's equivalent to 1 offset, essentially.
Right.
We're talking kilowatt hours.
Right.
So why did we do that? I know we said it's because 189 did it, and their logic was it's a low quality renewable resource.
Yeah, it's BS greenwashing basically. Yeah, they're like really cheap. So the unbundled RECs. So yeah, you know, that could change in the future, but right now it's sort of fakey. So yeah, we make you buy 5 to 1 and like 20 years worth. So it's like 100 to 1.
Okay, thanks.
That's more righteous, yeah.
Prudence, I did put you back in the queue so you can ask the other two after we get to Derek. Bronwyn, you're next.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Graham. This is great. I had a question about the primary energy factor for electric, and I saw you've kept it at 2.8, and I'm just wondering if that.
No, we didn't. Yeah, I glossed over that. So
okay.
that's one of our measures to encourage electrification. So we decided to use a future grid factor, which we did use data from NREL, which looked at you know how much greener the grid is going to get, and out of that we came up with a national average of a factor of 1.7 for 2050, which is about halfway through a building's life if it's built today, and so that's what we're going to do. So.
Great.
And for the sake of that graphic that I think you're referring to, Bronwyn, we basically just used the 2018 source energy factor for comparison's sake to show an equivalency between what 2021 would look like compared to 2018 without trying to show you guys 4 different numbers, basically.
Gotcha. Right. Thanks. That's great. Appreciate the clarity.
Thanks, Bronwyn. Brandon, you are next.
Thanks, Sean. And I will go straight off the bat and say I'm taking 2 questions because I have one in regard to, I'll call it large commercial multifamily between the 2 standards, and then getting into the prescriptive. So apologies in advance. But, you know, I'd hate to skip. It's been probably my issue and one of my clients' issues for years, which is tied to kind of where the vein has gone so far, which is the incentive of renewables. And I have no objection to, particularly in single family, trying to get renewables on site. But when it comes to dense urban sites, I would much rather see for-profit developers not buy REC credits, build a passive house building, put whatever solar they can on, and then use their equity to get to the next passive house building. And I know that's kind of one of the reasons why like 2018 core came about. And I guess my question is in 2021 on large multifamily, large commercial, is that going to continue to kind of be an option, and how is that going to work? And then I'll come back around to the prescriptive comments.
Yes. So I guess one point is that you know just meeting the heating and cooling targets prioritizes conservation pretty well, and so you know, you're pretty solid on that. So then it's just a question of like all the other sort of other equipment efficiency versus renewables. Like how far do you go with you know, equipment efficiency versus renewables? And so on the core path, or like the regular 2021 path, yeah, you know, that motivates equipment efficiency conservation, and you know, so that should work a little bit better, you know, with the new sort of unit sensitivity. That should work a little bit better, at least for large multifamily, make that more workable. So if that's kind of your perspective, you know, that you would go with the regular tier there if you want to kind of further prioritize conservation, and that's the path where you could get even credit for like a battery. We're still kind of working on the calculation protocol for that, but you know, that could help there. But if you want to take the perspective that I've done enough with conservation just by building passive and crushing my heating and cooling loads, and after that it doesn't matter to me whether I do more conservation or renewables, then you would go for the 0 tier.
Yeah, I mean, I guess I'm just always trying to figure out how to get the developers who are willing to put their, you know, finances on the line to get these things done, incentivized to get the best building possible, but have as much cash to go do it again. And it's because I know that they need to be able to compete in the marketplace to get it done. So on the prescriptive side, though, completely different scale, because now you're down to single family. You know, I love everything where you're heading. I think keeping it simple and possible for single family not to pay for high amounts of modeling, high amounts of thermal bridge detailing is absolutely the right way to go. But that said, there's a lot of controls that you have to put in place to get that to work. So I was curious, are those like labeled versus listed R values? How do you address thermal bridging? And the HRV, ERV, could you just prescribe it by location so that, say, certain, you know, picking the right equipment is just baked in? But yeah, so I guess it's 3 questions in one. It's the only way I can get around Sean.
Okay, sorry, could you repeat the 3?
The first would be like the effective versus labeled R values, because you showed like an R38, where I know in Seattle,
yeah,
Vancouver, you can kind of go lower than that if you've really addressed thermal bridging. And, you know, it's wall assembly, so they're kind of tied together. Is it basically R38 planning on a fairly traditional wall assembly, or is that continuous insulation with minimal bridging?
So that's effective value. That's the requirement on the effective value, including the framing, and we have so we specify the framing factors. So that's something that we're going to have a little bit more calculation support for.
Oh no, I think it's great. I'm not sliding it. It's just curious how you got there. And then what about the ERV versus HRV? Meaning, like, you're in the Pacific Northwest, the default is just going to be an HRV. You're in DC, it's going to be an ERV. Is there a way that you could tie that in? And then kind of tied to that, the numbers seem low to me, and maybe that's just history.
Yeah, so it is location specific as to whether you have to do latent recovery or not, and I think it ends up being zone by zone for that. But the winter sensible recovery efficiency is more fussy. That's like climate location specific to maintain that 60-degree air delivery.
Awesome, thank you. Thanks for letting me get away with it, Sean.
I did, and I appreciate you actually apologize first. I would have, apologized. You know, what's that? Ask for permission. I screwed up the line, but you know what I'm talking about. All right, Zach, let's send it over to you.
All right, thank you. Well, I know there's a lot more questions, so this is a great session. I want to take a moment. Everything that none of what we do at the Accelerator would be possible without support from our sponsors, and our founding sponsors are 475 high performance building supply. They just became a founding sponsor last week, upgraded from patrons. So thank you, 475. Baxt Ingui Architects, Mitsubishi Electric, Train HVAC US, RDH Building Science, Stocorp, and Zola Windows. Our stakeholder partner is NYSERDA, and our patron sponsors are Inotech Windows and Doors, also a new sponsor, Morrison Hirschfield, and Partel. Next week, we will have Construction Tech Tuesday, of course, at the same time as our happy hour on Wednesday. On Tuesdays, we have Construction Tech, and this one will feature Marcel Studer from Econ Group. This is aligned content with the Passive House Canada Summit, and we have called it Canadian Funk. Marcel had no part in the naming of this. The term funk is probably most appropriately defined by Kevin Brennan, but it's some sort of combination of street cred around Passive House and some innovative in the field work. So this is about the technical, the technique, and the technology of construction tech. So join us. I'll share a link to this. And next we have a psychedelic presentation by Chris Higgins. We've got a thermal image of the city of Vancouver in the background here. Chris Higgins of the city of Vancouver is going to be joining us. We're really excited. He will be talking about the climate action progress that's happened recently in Vancouver, as well as sharing insights, key insights from the Passive House Canada Summit, which is happening next week. So please join us next week for the happy hour. Thank you.
Thank you, Zach. What a great lineup. We got to get some more American municipal policymakers on here. Maybe Bev can help direct us to some people, but like I love that Chris is going to come on with some thermal images. Thank you so much, Graham, Lisa, and everybody at PHIUS. This is a really important discussion. I know we're going to have another hour of questions or more tonight, but just really wanted to thank you for coming on and invite you back anytime. Let's continue this discussion. This is so critical, figuring out all these little bits and bobs we need to figure out to make this easier, especially as we move into retrofits. Prudence?
Totally agree, Monty, as usual. Okay, not as usual. Sometimes we disagree, but I love you for it. Anyways, yeah, big thanks to PHIUS for being game for doing this. You know, getting hosed with questions for the next hour is part of the fun. So thanks for being game. And with that, let's roll into the after hour.